In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbartis, Lizzy Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
All right. Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights, to the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Russell Guest, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host from the Derby City, Miss Lizzy Haynes. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about this movie, and excited to podcast with you, Russell. It's been a minute.
It has. And I'm excited also. We have a new guest joining us today for the first time, coming to you from Hotlanta, Georgia. Special guest, screenwriter and poet, Quinn Que. Quinn, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Great. Before we get going, let's see. You've got projects, you produce things, you make stuff. Tell us about your efforts that you'd like to plug, Quinn.
I don't have anything I can officially promote right now. I'm working on a short that we want to get filmed this year and hopefully screened next year. It's very early days. I have a Substack, I have a Patreon, and I have a somewhat prolific Twitter account. So I would always encourage people to find me on the internet.
Well, where can people follow you on Twitter and Patreon? Where can we reach you?
I am at Edoquin, EDOKWIN.
And if we want to give you money, where do we go on Patreon?
I love money. Edoquin everywhere. Put that into your preferred search engine or social media platform of choice. Patreon.com/Edoquin, EDOKWIN. You'll be able to find me very easily. Same thing with Twitter, or also known as X. So twitter.com/Edoquin or x.com/Edoquin.
Okay, excellent. If you're in a generous mood, start handing money out. We like that. So, what is the movie that you missed, Quinn, as a kid? Saw when you got older, but maybe it wasn't what you thought it would be. You wish you could go back and see that movie as a kid at the first time.
Maybe Batman Begins like 10 years earlier, because the Batman that I grew up on was like late Burton and mostly Schumacher. I don't want to be unfair, but it's like my Batman is not camp, and so I would have loved to have been able to embrace a more serious version of the character at a earlier period. But Nolan came at the right time anyway, so it worked out. But yeah, probably a Nolan Batman would be great, or even just like a Nolan movie in general. He didn't really make anything in the States until like the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, we covered The Dark Knight already, so check that episode out for us. But we've not done Batman Begins, so we'd love to cover that one still. Lizzy, how about you? What's a movie you missed as a kid, got when you were older, and maybe it wasn't as good as you thought it could have been had you seen it as a kid?
The Sandlot.
The Sandlot. Yeah.
I never saw that movie as a kid, and I think really just because it wasn't, I would have watched anything that my brother put in front of me when I was young, and he was not a baseball kid, and I always feel so left out when people talk about that movie. You know, it's like the dog and the camaraderie and all the things, and I always kind of feel like I missed out on some huge era of my life because I didn't watch that movie. And watching it as an adult, it's cute, but it just doesn't have, you don't get the sparkle from it that you would when you were a kid.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, like I have, I love The Sandlot. I saw it as a kid, but I got it in those formative years. You know, one that I didn't get, though, that I wish I had, was Masters of the Universe. I've heard people say, Masters of the Universe, that was so cool. And even my wife was like, it's great, we should check it out. And we bought a copy of it. And I was like, great, I like He-Man the cartoon. And I just really wish I had seen that as a kid because it's made for kids, and I didn't have the nostalgia that she did. So I was just like, I don't know, if I ever go back and watch my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, even as from a kid, I even as an adult sit there and go like, man, I have nostalgia, but I'm making a lot of excuses. These are not that these are not that good.
Right. I mean, there's a gigantic group of millennials that feel that way about Hocus Pocus. where they actually don't like it at all, because like Chad is a good example. Like he didn't get to watch it when he was young. So therefore, when he watches it now, all he does is see it for its flaws. And that's the beauty of when you have that nostalgia, you're so forgiving of those kinds of holes, I'll say, plot holes in movies.
I honestly wish I could watch a lot of movies again as a kid, because almost every movie you watch when you're a kid, you're like, this is the best movie I've ever seen.
Right.
And when you've only seen like 100 movies, they're all fantastic. So, I mean, at some point you start to amass enough movies and you're just like, wow, some of these are really great and some of them aren't as great as I thought. So, part of getting older. What is the last movie you saw, Quinn?
Civil War, technically, but I saw parts of Furiosa, and I liked it. I like both. I mean, actually, that's not true. I gave Civil War kind of a negative grading, but I was trying to be fair. I think Alex Garland has the juice as a director, but as a writer, I'm like, to some of his ideas and his execution. I think the best thing he's ever done, arguably, is still Ex Machina, and that was his first directorial writing debut.
He did Sunshine before that, right?
He wrote that. He didn't direct it. That was Danny Boyle.
Okay, it's Danny Boyle. Okay. Sunshine's really good too.
No, he's an established writer. He's a great writer, but it's like, I think he's gotten better at directing than he has at writing. I've seen Devs, I've seen Ex Machina, I've seen Annihilation. I did not see Men, but I heard about it and I was not impressed with what I heard. I think sometimes that he gets really caught up in the idea, the high concept of it all, but then when it's time to actually execute and build the world and develop it and make it make sense for the audience, something kind of falls short. It's frustrating that, because like I want to like his stuff more. But Furiosa, great movie. I would encourage people to see it. It seems to work well as a first chapter of that story, a lead into Fury Road.
Okay, very good. Then, Lizzy, what's the last movie you saw?
We saw Challengers. It's that Zendaya tennis movie. It was really interesting. It was not at all what I expected it to be. They kind of advertised it. I was envisioning something in the vein of Closer. It's an early 2000s movie with Natalie Portman, Julia Roberts, Clive Owen, Jude Law, where it's just kind of these relationship dynamics between people and just how people can kind of hurt each other. That was what I was expecting, but that's not what I got. And I didn't dislike it, but it certainly caught me off guard. And but Zendaya is spectacular. So, I mean, it's really hard to dislike anything when she's on the screen. She's just like magnanimous. I love her.
Okay. And the last movie I saw was a repeat, but I watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Again, it's a big hit with my son, and I have to say, it is a lot of fun. I was skeptical when this movie came out. I passed on it. It's a lot of fun.
Love it.
The Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is probably the best thing after. I like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man a lot for those first two movies. So I was pretty hesitant. I did not enjoy the Andrew Garfield era, so that's why I passed on this initially. Tom Holland's pretty good too. Tying it into the Avengers and all that stuff, I just really like Spider-Man to just be on his own kind of more so. And anyway, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was really creative and fun, and it was different, and it was different enough to be different and didn't feel like a rehash. I enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun.
It's like a love letter to Spider-Man fans. That's really how it felt. It really feel like they gave the people what they wanted, and I really enjoyed it as well.
But today, Lizzy, what are we going to be discussing?
We are going to talk Iron Giant.
All right. This stars Eli Marienthal, Jennifer Aniston, Harry Connick Jr., Vin Diesel, and Christopher McDonald. Shooter McGavin himself. Warner Brothers releases this in 1999. Its budget is $50 million. That's actually not as much as a lot of the animated movies that Disney was cranking out at the time. So Warner Brothers didn't have the budget that you would have seen for a lot of the big ticket animated features. It does not do well in the box office. It only grosses $23 million. So it's under half of what it actually cost to make this domestically. That's actually a pretty big loss. The film received high praise from critics. It was not marketed very well, though. And the nationwide debut came out against The Sixth Sense in 1999. Not helpful. Brad Bird, the director, just said this movie wasn't even promoted until 4 months before its release, whereas Tarzan, again by Disney, was promoted a whole year in advance and had a lot of oomph behind it. And, Tarzan did much better than box office. So this is only number 78 in the box office on the year. It comes behind Arlington Road and ahead of Being John Malkovich. And the number one movie that year, as you mentioned earlier, Quinn, is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But these ratings stand by it. The IMDb ratings give it an 8.1. The critics of Rotten Tomatoes give it a 96% here. So the audience score is not far behind at 90%. It is an Annie Award winner 4 times over for Best Animated Feature, Outstanding Individual Achievement in Character Animation, Music in an Animated Feature Production, Storyboarding in an Animated Feature Production. It is the BAFTA Children's Award for Best Feature Film. It is a Hugo Award nominee for Best Dramatic Presentation, and a Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Award nominee for Best Script. The AFI did not make the top 10 animated movies when they did a top 10 animated movies in 2008, but it was one of the 40 nominees considered, so still pretty good class to be in that top 40. Quinn, had you seen The Iron Giant before?
Yes. Yes, I had seen this movie before. This was basically one of the formative movies of my childhood. I saw it contemporaneously to the release. I loved it. Saw it with my dad. Me and my dad going to watch movies basically every weekend was like a huge thing for us. And this was one of the all-timers. As a young kid, I had no concept of like box office and like, oh my God, is this the best movie ever? Like, is this making money, quote unquote? For me, this is the best movie ever because I just really liked it. I identified with Hogarth. I think, what was this? 1999. I was probably like very similar age to our 9-year-old Hogarth Hughes. I loved giant robots. I loved action. I loved animation. One of the things that really kind of hit for me with this movie was the fact that, in contrast to some of the Disney movies that I'd seen, it did feel a little more mature is not the right word, but maybe a little bit more nuanced. Looking back on it, I've often said this film feels more subtle than other movies of its ilk. I think maybe that's a little bit of rose-colored glasses because it definitely has, like sort of the broad comedy and the action of an animated kids movie. But it's like there's a heart there and a willingness to kind of like sit in particular moments that has maybe kind of drifted away as animations become a little bit more bombastic and has tried to kind of beat audiences over the head with how clever that the writers think they are or whatever. And this movie, I think, is avoiding those tropes, in part because it preceded a lot of them.
And so you've continued to watch this as you've gotten older.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that your experience has changed as you've gotten older?
I mean, I don't have kids, but this is an all-timer for me. And the fact that it's a cult classic, I guess, only helps that in some ways. But for me, this is the kind of movie that I would watch with my hypothetical kids. This movie feels like the kind of movie that you can basically watch with anybody. You could watch this by yourself. You could watch this with your kids. You could watch this with your partner. The key through line is it's a story about what it means to be a person trying to figure out who you are and like what your place in the world is. Hogarth and the Giant are kind of doing that in different ways. Hogarth is this precocious, gifted kid who's like up a grade in elementary school, and that leads to him getting picked on. He doesn't seem to have a lot of friends, really. The only people he really relates to are like mom and random patrons of the diner she works at, and animals. He loves animals. The Giant is this amnesiac alien that doesn't even know like who or what he is, really. And that idea of like, who am I, what is my purpose, that's super relatable. That's relatable then, that's relatable now. And the fact that it's a period piece, like it was set in the 50s but released in the 90s, means that it's kind of evergreen. You could watch this like today and it'll have the same impact, I think.
Yeah. Now, Lizzy, had you seen The Iron Giant before?
I had, but this was a movie that, unlike Quinn, I did not visit. I was well in my 30s before I saw this movie. And this actually falls into the category of a movie that I wish that I had seen when I was a kid. I was first introduced to it when my oldest, Wilder, he must have been probably 4 when he saw it for the first time. And my husband had seen this movie before. He recommended it. And I just, you see the picture of, big robot man, and he's so excited. And that's perhaps why it flew over my radar. And I'm going to be totally honest. This was not a movie that I saw and chose not to watch as a kid. This was a movie that I didn't even know existed until my son wanted to watch it. The way that I like to describe this movie without giving any kind of spoilers away, and the way that I feel about this movie, and a lot of this is piggybacking on what you were saying, Quinn. I'll use a metaphor. When you're in a relationship and you are in love, and that love feels mature and pure and wonderful, one of the most amazing things that you can do is just sit quietly together, and that silence speaks volumes, if you will. It's like the fact that we can just sit together and there's no awkward silence. We're just kind of soaking it in each other's presence. That is what this movie feels like for me in terms of a movie. It's quiet and it's thoughtful. And even though there are definitely some cute, sweet, funny moments, there are no gigantic big flashes. And it's just a movie that the story is rich enough that they don't use any kind of big gimmicks to pull you in. It's just a really beautiful coming of age story. And my kids love this movie, and I love it as well. I think it is such an amazing kids movie.
We don't do video here, but I want to let you know, both Lizzy and Quinn have this warm affection like over their faces. This movie makes them feel good, and
yes,
and
it does.
So this is like a warm chicken soup for your movie
chicken
viewing
soup for the soul.
Yeah,
it is.
So,
yes,
and I'm gonna follow suit. I watched this movie. I did not see it in the theaters. Definitely, I think I did see the ads of the previews, and it just didn't get to me as like I got to get to that at this point. By 1999, I might be getting out of the I got to get to theaters to see the animated movie age. But I did see it when it hit the rental stores. I liked it. Now, I did not touch this movie or get to it again until college, and I didn't remember all the details, and I started to doubt myself because of given when I watched this. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know, 14-year-old me didn't really know what he's talking about or whatever. I mean, and it just came on one of those movies. Like I got like on Stars or whatever. Like it came on and I watched it again on my own. It's just sitting there going like, wow, this is really good. Like I didn't know it was this good. I think I appreciated it more as an adult than I did as a kid. And then again, a long time went by, but I held it in high regard and I remembered it pretty well. So when we got to study this, I was excited. And again, I watched this with my son. My son wanted to watch this. I rarely get to watch these movies still at this age. He's only 4 with my son. So that was special to prepare for this. And he wanted to see this. He had like a little card that had Scooby-Doo and Bugs Bunny and all these animated characters on it. The Iron Giant was one of them. And he said, who's that? I said, that's the Iron Giant. He says, is he a good guy? And I said, you don't know that right away, but yeah. And he's like, I want to see that. So it just was serendipitous that Quinn hit us with the Iron Giant because it was right when Rant wanted to be introduced to him anyway. So it made him go through all the feels. It was magical to watch him light up. He laughed. He was excited. He was out of his chair with his arms over his head going like, yay. And it upset him too. And it took him through the full emotional roller coaster, and he did like it at the end. So as a parent, that's also really rewarding to watch that happen too. So I have appreciated this movie at 3 different levels, and that's a special thing. I'm glad I got to experience at each one of those phases. It is magical, and it is underrated, and it deserved all the money that it didn't get.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will be back after these messages. We are going to spoil Iron Giant. You don't want this one spoiled, and you do want to watch this one if you haven't seen it. We will be back after this.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
All right. We're back, and Lizzy, for those who haven't seen The Iron Giant since 1999, will you refresh our memories?
Yes. The year is 1957. Hogarth is a young 9-year-old boy living with his single mom, Anne, when one day he makes an unbelievable discovery of a humongous iron robot with unmatched machinery and strength, a hunger for metal, and the heart of a child. Hogarth isn't the only one who noticed the Iron Giant. Kent Mansley, a government agent from Washington, whose overall philosophy is to fear and therefore destroy the unknown, has come into town. Hogarth enlists the help of Dean, the town hoarder and artist, to provide a home for his new friend. And while there, the giant learns a valuable lesson that although he has the power to destroy, he also has the power to choose. More government agents show up and attack the giant. With the help of Hogarth, he chooses to be more than a weapon. Mansley, however, fires a missile without realizing it will destroy not only the giant, but everyone in range. The giant makes his last choice to fly into the clouds above to reroute the missile, sacrificing himself, but not before telling Hogarth he loves him. Soon after, Hogarth hears a familiar beeping signaling to him that his dear friend and real-life Superman may be paying him another visit soon.
Wow. Again, big smile on my face listening to you recap that. Quinn, you mentioned that this is a movie that is a period piece. This is set in 1957, and this is the time at which Sputnik has gone up. There's references to it. There's newspaper articles in it. It's around in the movie. It's not at the forefront. You might not notice as a kid, but certainly as an adult. This is not incidental that it's linked to this time. It's really critical that it's set in the 50s. Talk about what that 50s setting is doing for this movie and why it wouldn't be so great to set it in 1999.
So this is a movie that is set in a time, but feels, I would say, more authentic to that time. That's part of the subtlety that I do think is applicable here. You see sometimes that stories set in the 50s or the 40s or the 60s or whatever, they kind of overdo it because again they're trying to be evocative of the era, but this feels more naturalistic. It's calling back to the space race, to the Cold War, to concerns over nuclear proliferation and the bomb. What we're seeing with this is just subtly in the background this idea of, okay, what would happen if something came crashing down from the sky and we had to investigate it and we had to figure out in this milieu of like fear and tension what to do about it? And that's kind of like Mansley's role in this. He gets sent out there and he's investigating. And from his perspective, this is a threat. This could be aliens, this could be the Soviets, this could be any number of things, but it's bad. He's representing that. Whereas a lot of the other characters, particularly Hogarth, are looking at it more openly, optimistically. And so there's that duality of, I would say, the American spirit of like, we want to assume the best, but deep down we fear for the worst. And this movie encapsulates that very well. And that's why it has to be set in that time. If it was set later, it wouldn't have the same punch because the 90s, as much as I love the 90s, was more of an era where the idea of getting blown up by the bomb just wasn't real, because we more or less passed the Cold War.
You're in the dot-com bubble. Things are seemingly pretty good. The Cold War is over. We hadn't been hit by 9/11. We were in that really complacent pre-9/11 period where life's good, nothing bad's going to happen, all the bad stuff's behind us. And 99 would be the worst time to set this, in fact. Lizzy, do you find that it's charming that it's set in this time period?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's just something so simplistic about it. And, in the 90s, things are changing. There's a technological revolution, if you will, that's happening where we're seeing nuggets of that happening in the 90s. And, nowadays, like if this were to happen in 2024, if an Iron Giant fell down, and, people would be clicking with their smartphones and taking videos of it, people putting it up on TikTok and it become a trend. Like that's the world that we live in now. And in some ways it can be amazing. But I think if you were to have this story in today's world, those elements would potentially cheapen the bond that Hogarth and the Iron Giant have, because there is kind of this purity of like they're the only ones that know about each other. He's hiding in plain sight with the help of Dean. And I think that there truly is something sweet and charming about just that slower time period, especially in a small town, which I'm imagining they tried to tee it up that that's what they had, where it's like everybody knows everybody. Love that.
I like that they looked at different artwork of like Norman Rockwell and to capture this American life. I'll be honest with you, I'm with you, Quinn. There's something very authentic about it. This is the year that our director is born. This is very much a world that he's familiar with. He did the Super Twinkie where you shot the whipped cream onto the Twinkie and ate it himself. I mean, there's so much of like him reminiscing and putting himself into this character. He didn't write the book, but I mean, he's made this very much his own. And we see that as we'll talk about that throughout here tonight. But also that paranoia point that you touched on is really important. We talked about this, and I think we just covered Earth versus Flying Saucers. Came out in 1956, 1 year before this story occurs, episode 260. And then we also covered The Right Stuff from 1983, and that's the space race. And that was episode 159 for us. In these movies, we have seen the paranoia of what is coming from outer space, the race to get there fast, the fear, especially in Earth versus Flying Saucers. Anything from space is deadly and dangerous. Anything that's not American, it's a time of great scare, and that paranoia fuels this movie.
For sure.
The government wanting to come in and just shoot first and ask questions later is definitely a 1950s mentality. This movie doesn't fly without that. Kent Mansley is not going to be as good of a character if you pull him into another time. So I thought that was fantastic. There's details. What's on TV, the mayonnaise commercial, or whether it be his rifle that he had, or the style of the toys in the background. There's a lot of detail upon further rewatch on this that you sit there and go like, this is a pretty good time capsule. This type of animation style is detailed enough, but it's also really charming. I really like the animation style in this a lot. So it's not as abstract as something that you might get. Some of the Disney films, I mean, like change the shape of people's faces more, and they may not put as much detail into the surroundings around them. And on the other hand, this style, Norman Rockwell is super real, and everything's changed on that. So it's influenced by that. I read that. I'll be honest with you, they did their own thing here, and I really, really like this type of animation. You don't see it a whole lot. It's more real, but it's still very fun at the same time.
Well, crucially, it's blended. It's a combination of traditional animation with computer-generated imagery on top. They use CGI for the giants and some other effects, but a lot of the actual scenes and the characters, Hogarth, Dean, etc., they are done in a traditional animation that was, sort of inherited by Bird and his team. And I think what we've seen since is more of a lean toward a kind of Pixar illumination. No offense to those guys, like heavily rendered look that this film, I think, just again predated. So it just wasn't the thing to do.
Now, Lizzy, this movie, as we talked about, this is challenging content for kids. It is simplified, but they're asking a lot here. They're talking about the loss of a father. They're talking about life and death as a concept. They're dealing with souls and self-sacrifice. I mean, talk about one of the things that this movie does, I think is so beautiful, is that it gives kids a lot of really positive, big picture questions, and it packages it for them in a digestible way. I don't know how many movies do all that as effectively as this.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that, the way that they talk about death, they make sure to, like with the scene with the deer, you have kind of two pictures. Hogarth kind of almost represents like the logic part of death, because at this point, the concept of seeing a dead deer, I'm sure is something that he's seen before. So he kind of is, not anywhere near apathetic. He absolutely has empathy, but he is kind of just more black and white with it, almost playing the adult role to the giant, who is now almost seeing this is his first interaction with death. And so getting to see them play it out, but seeing the child be the voice of reason, I think is a really interesting way of communicating, because I know that was very intentional for the writers to say, we want the child to be giving this news because we know that the dialogue would be in a way that a child can understand a child, and him kind of communicating, the giant is crying, he's very sad, and he's just like, yeah, death is sad, but death is also just a part of life, and kind of explaining it in just a very matter of fact package. And the same with, probably my favorite thing about this movie is the Iron Giant really is, he's a giant gun, essentially. He really is just a gigantic weapon. And it's this concept of like, what if a gun didn't want to be a gun? And it's this idea of kind of reverting back to Spider-Man, actually, of when I watch this movie, like the mission statement of this is like the Uncle Ben's, like, with great power comes great responsibility, a little bit. It's this idea of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And we can have conversations around that of like, you get to choose. And I think that is a really powerful concept for a child, and incredibly empowering, and a lesson that all of our children have to understand is that at the end of the day, whether it's what you're going to have for lunch, or whether it's you're being faced with a really tough situation with some mean kids at school, like, you have to make a decision on what you're going to do. And ultimately how you respond to that's your choice that you have to make. I love how this movie does just a really artful way of watching Hogarth teach that lesson, but also him learn it as well as the giant is going through his own journey.
And we also find out that that's the scene where we find out he is a weapon, because Hogarth points the gun at him and he activates, and his eyes turn red, and you go,
Yes.
oh, you as a viewer don't for sure know the level of threat that he poses until then either. So there's a lot unfolding in that scene. Again, they manage it all so well. There's a lot happening, and they make it digestible. And like I said, even watching my 4-year-old connect and follow every bit of that, powerful stuff, and really cool to see that in action. Quinn, at the end of this movie, the Iron Giant has to sacrifice himself. Again, a big, tall order for a kid's movie.
Yes.
This is a big thing in the movie. Talk about watching the giant realize that he's going to just intercept this nuclear warhead coming down on this town by flying into it himself, saying, "You stay, I go."
That's a callback to when Hogarth first meets the giant after they've been, hanging out and playing for the day. He's trying to convince the giant to stay hidden in the forest and not follow him home. I'm going, you stay. And then the giant, realizing, at this point he's developed, he's matured, and he understands what he has to do. And he tells Hogarth, "You stay, I go." And he flies up. It's interesting. That scene is the penultimate moment. It's not only the climax of the film, but it's the giant making the final decision for himself, what he is. A recurrent theme, a recurrent statement is, we are who we choose to be. This is what Dean tells Hogarth to kind of help him to reconcile with the fact that he's kind of isolated and bullied. And it's then what Hogarth tells the giant to make him recognize that he's not a gun, or he can choose not to be a gun. And so the giant says, I'm not going to be the monster robot. I'm going to be Superman. He flies up, he intercepts the bomb, and we assume he gets destroyed. And I'm gonna be honest, I just rewatched this before, sitting down to talk to you guys, and that scene chokes me up every time. I literally was kind of tearing up as I was watching it, because they tell each other they love each other, say goodbye, and the giant's last words, quote unquote last words, are Superman, because he wants to be a hero. And when I saw that in the theater, I certain I had the same reaction. It's like, oh no, but also, oh my God. And it's hard to make really emotional and impactful scenes like that feel organic, but it really does feel organic. Essentially, we've come to this point where it seems like it's just all over, right? This missile is targeted to the giant. It's going to come down. It's going to destroy everybody. But the giant, and I mean, it's kind of funny that the giant kind of suddenly understands everything, and he understands if he goes away, he can catch it. But if the giant goes away, the missile won't come down and kill everybody. It'll only kill him, and he does it. I'm not sure the kind of happy teaser ending of the giant may still be alive. I don't think that. I don't want to say it undermines his sacrifice, but it certainly feels kind of trying to have your cake and eat it too, in a sense, because it's in a lot of other context, we would just say he's dead. He's dead, Jim. But in this instance, he dies, but there's an opening for him to come back because he is capable of healing himself, even when he gets destroyed.
Adult me really liked the memorial statue of like the sacrifice is really big when it costs you everything. However, having watched my son watch this, he was really upset when the Iron Giant was blown up and everybody remembered him. And he did understand. He understood that he loved Hogarth and the people that much. Like it like made me a little teary-eyed to be like, wow, that's an admirable thing. And you see him understand that the one person is not as great as the whole town. And that he's willing to do that. And even as a 4-year-old, the lights are turning on. He understood it, but it still made him sad. And then when he got that bolt or that that screw back, and it was still, the lights were still on, the happiness was like, they did their market research. I'm sure they showed it to two groups of kids.
Focus groups.
Two focus groups were shown this, and I know they debated this as a director, and I know they got it right because this is a kids movie. And as much as we as adults will like it, it is still also for kids and predominantly for kids, and that was the right way to finish it out because still could come back. That was enough for him.
I agree. I like the ending. Of course, I didn't see it, I like, as I said before, until I was in my 30s. But watching it with my son, I loved being able to watch him come back.
Now, we have some pretty big names for some of the cast here. Vin Diesel is the Iron Giant himself. Yes. I mean, they even considered some other big names. They looked at Peter Cullen, Sean Connery, Frank Welker. By the way, that's Scooby-Doo and, Frank. I mean,
Transformers.
Yeah, exactly. Frank Welker's all over the animated world. So, I mean, they looked at some big names here. There's not a lot of speaking lines here. And Vin Diesel gets it anyway. And he does it again later with Groot, by the way. So, he seems to land these science fiction characters who have almost no lines, but still demand we still connect with them. Yeah, we still connect with them. I think the Iron Giant, though, what I want to get at here is he's so limited. It's mostly on the animation. There's something very childlike about him. Quinn, talk about what makes us as an audience connect to a bucket of bolts.
So the Giant, like I said earlier, is very relatable because he's kind of an everyman in a weird way and a child. He is amnesiac. He's not from here. He doesn't understand the world. And he has to kind of learn not only about the world, but about himself over time. All he really is driven by, it seems, is a desire to explore and to eat metal. For some reason, we are what we eat, and this giant robot eats metal, perhaps because that helps, fuel him or helps him repair himself. But we can all relate to the idea of being kind of young and not understanding things, and then finding out that there's maybe a path set out for us. A parent says, you're supposed to do this, or the society you grow up in says that this is your path, this is who you are, this is what you do. There are people, I'm sure, who a life of national service, of joining the military, of becoming a human weapon is a very real and didactic thing. It's just what they have to do. And the Giant, realizing that he has that potential in him, doesn't want to, and pushing it back against that. The moments where his eyes turn red because his defense mechanisms are turned on, and he's shooting laser beams almost hypnotically. He's like, no. And when in the third act, he's trying to stop himself from reacting offensively or defensively to the missiles and the military firing at him. It's like, no, his eyes are turning red. It's like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a gun. So all of that is extremely relatable. We it's very much abstracted because it's a giant robot with weapons capabilities, but the basic idea of I want to choose my own path, I want to figure out what it is for myself, we can all relate to that.
Now, Lizzy, one of the things I really enjoyed in this movie was Hogarth and his mother and Mansley, and just watching him as the family life here. We get a pretty good glimpse of it. We see her at work. We see that he has, single mom, overworked, has to send her kid home on his own, and he has to feed himself. Doesn't always feed himself what he's supposed to eat.
Right.
Goes out when he's a mischievous boy. He breaks the rules and goes out at night. I mean, talk about that family dynamic. There's something very authentic again about I see this independent spirit that Hogarth has that can't help but make me smile
Yes, and I think that's something else that makes this time work so well, because I think that, of course, a mother-son relationship can be special in any decade, but I think particularly looking at the kind of things that Hogarth is doing and getting away with, I think would be much, much harder to do now. And I just think that the 50s really yield itself for Hogarth to be able to get into his shenanigans. I love their dynamic so much because my dad grew up with my grandma. She was a single mom, and my dad was born in 52. So like it's some kind of like similar age ranges. And my dad always talks about this concept of just like this free range parenting, of like how there was just a lot of trust, and how my dad loved his mom so dearly that he knew the boundaries not to push, but at the same time, he's still like a young boy learning his way, so he's going to push as much as he can. And the mom, she's overworked, she's tired, but yet there's still little things that she still manages to have eyes in the back of her head. Like there's that one point where she is at the junkyard and she's like, okay, so this is where you've been spending all of your weekends. And he's like, wait, how'd you know? She's like, ha, like I've got you. And I just think that their dynamic is just so sweet and pure. And he's just like a mama's boy in like the best way possible. Like I hope that relationship, like cheers to all moms having that kind of a relationship with their sons, because it really is just so unbelievably special. There's nothing like being a boy mom.
They went and looked through a lot of big names for that mom character as well. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Meg Ryan, Jodie Benson, Julianne Moore, Nicole Kidman, all were considerations. Jennifer Aniston lands it. So it's interesting. Even those minor parts secondary parts are getting big names associated with them. And in 99, that's pretty far along into Aniston's career, enough to say like, wow, that's pretty cool. I don't know that animation at this point was sucking in the big names as much. Like now it's very commonplace. Get a big name, put it on the movie. It'll help sell movies.
Yes.
I don't know that that's as common in 99. So
I don't think so.
I think that's cool that they landed some of these. And, again, as I said, Harry Connick Jr., such a good bad guy voice. Such a Kent Mansley was also considered. They looked at Tommy Lee Jones, Alec Baldwin, Burt Reynolds, Kevin Spacey, James Woods, Dennis Hopper, Patrick Stewart. I mean, they looked at a lot of great people, and I see those names and they're amazing. But even as I see them all, I couldn't replace Christopher McDonald. His fast, somehow there's a sharpness in what he does that, there's an uncaring nature of I'm afraid, I'm panicked, and and I'm so driven. Like he's admirably driven, but he's driven for all the wrong things, which is such a great villain, is such a great antagonist. And I love him following around Hogarth. Talk about what Mansley does for this movie, because he's a really good bad guy.
Yeah, it's funny. I was struck by, like, when we were watching it, I was struck by how they basically play the character straight for the most part. Like I could again think of how like a villain or an antagonist in a more modern animated film, there would probably be a lot more subversion, a lot more twists and turns. The character, again, it's a animated children's film, so there's going to be elements of like broad comedy still, and like Hogarth plays pranks on him and tries to lose him at various points, but essentially Mansley is what he says he is. He works for the government, the Bureau of Unexplained Phenomena. It's kind of like an X-Files, Men in Black type organization. He does have contacts in Washington. He does have connections to the military, seems to be military oversight as well. He's a chief investigator, and his instincts, crucially, are very search and destroy. He's trying to, firstly, when he first comes there, he assumes that he's not going to find anything. He assumes that, oh, this is just a bunch of nonsense, and like it's a small town. There's not going to be like a big story in a small town. But when he finds that like there's actually is evidence of something real there, then he's like, a dog with the scent, and he won't stop until he A, finds the giant, and B, convinces his superiors to come and eliminate the perceived threat. And his relationship with Hogarth is interesting because Hogarth is, again, a precocious kid. So he firstly, he knows what Mansley's about. He immediately doesn't like him. He immediately understands, like, I can't trust this guy. And as they're kind of going back and forth, Mansley's realizing that Hogarth knows more than he lets on. Hogarth's realizing that Mansley's like not just an annoying weirdo, but like a serious problem. There's this cat and mouse element with them that ultimately leads to Mansley really revealing the menace that he is. Like, he's not above kidnapping and interrogating a small child, chloroforming him. He's not beyond like lying to anyone and everyone about what he is, who he is, and his intentions. As far as he's concerned, his mission and his goals supersede everything, and he's not afraid to hurt anybody in the process, which is important because later on we see he's willing to lie about the fact that Hogarth is dead in order to convince the military they need to kill the giant. And that is literally a huge part of the third act conflict. If not for Mansley doing that and then later calling in the missile strike, this all could have been resolved peacefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And well said. One thing that I like that Brad Bird does, he sticks in these little moments. Frank and Ollie, the two trainsmen who Kent interviews at the derailment of a train there, that the train hits his head. These are actual real people. They're voicing themselves. They're Disney classic animators, and these are very animated people. And so he stuck in these people that he knew into his movie, and they are both train enthusiasts as well and enjoyed train toys and stuff. So again, there's all these little moments that Brad Bird is sticking from his own childhood and from his own past in here. His own son Michael is one of the voices of the kids who spots the giant and the binoculars. And so the more you start to study this, there's so much of Brad Bird's love in here. It's really a blessing that they got him. He had worked with George Lucas and Spielberg, and he had been able to have an impressive background. And so his contract they get from Turner, Warner does, and he got to choose any project he wanted. This is one that he connected with. This was in production to possibly be a musical. Pete Townsend of The Who had written music for this, and this would have been a whole different thing. I mean, it's a rock opera, and this Brad Bird takes that. It's a tall order to take Pete Townsend's work. I kind of want to get the Pete Townsend one too. I want both. But to take Pete Townsend music and to just toss it in the garbage is that's a bold move. I'm not sure I would have let him do that, but Warner Brothers did let him do that, and they brought him in. He wanted to write the script himself. Tim McCandless, he saw that his screenplay for Secondhand Lines and said, you know what, you can do this, but he wanted that too. There's a lot of the degree in this one. So Lizzy, I'm gonna throw this to you first. Talk about like what Brad Bird here is doing as a director. He does not have the money and the resources that a Disney film does. And he's actually quite resourceful to generate such good results.
Like I was saying earlier, I just think that this movie does so much without having to do so much. Looking at some of the other movies that were on your short list, we discussed The Lion King, and then there's a couple of other Disney classics in there. And to be super clear, The Lion King had a massive chokehold on me as a kid. So like I am a fan. But I think that when you look at some of these other Disney movies, traditionally the Disney formula was to have, a protagonist and antagonist, maybe a couple of talking animals, have some big songs, and make it really just whimsical and fun. And honestly, as things have progressed through the years, it's almost like the louder and the flashier, the better. Now you've got like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I also love, but now there's like little skits and scats throughout the songs. I think what this director did really well was just realize like we have a really solid story. We don't need those things. And we're going to really just focus on the quality of the characters. We're going to focus on the quality of the story. And we're going to lean on what we know how to animate and then CGI in the other parts with the robot. But I really just think like less was more in this movie. And it just really, really behooved them to be able to have that lower budget and just work with it. I'm afraid if they had a higher budget, that perhaps we would have gotten a cheaper version of the classic that we have now.
It's possible. That's possible. I got to say, one of the things that they did that was a great idea was renaming this movie. I guess it didn't do well in the box office, but the book's name is actually The Iron Man by Ted Hughes. And that's a 1968 novel. And the Iron Man obviously conjures up Tony Stark, Iron Man,
Yes.
or Ozzy Osbourne's I Am the Iron Man. So separating it from that was a great decision, I think. But that big theme that you mentioned earlier, Lizzy, what if a gun had a soul and didn't want to be a gun?
I mean, when you really think about it, it's a movie that, I mean, if you want to look at it at a literal sense, it's backtracking a little bit. More of the metaphorical sense is like we all have the power to choose whether it's we're talking about actual violence or we're talking about really anything. And in life, when big decisions or little decisions, we have the power to decide who we are going to be and what we're going to do and how we're going to behave. But I think we talked a little bit about coming off of the heels of a lot of kind of big historical events, and especially in this time in 1957, you know, in a literal sense, there's this idea of the Iron Giant is a gigantic gun, and he's talking to like us, the viewers, who are the people who have, because in our own sense, like when you're holding a gun, you're wielding that same power. So it's like Hogarth is talking to everybody that is ever behind on the other side of a gun, behind that barrel, being able to say like you have the power to choose.
It's born out of loss. Ted Hughes, the author of the book, lost his mother in the suicide. And unfortunately, Brad Bird lost his sister to gun violence. And so that resonant story there, it's both the writer and the director in this case.
Wow.
But again, Brad Bird is pushing this agenda. It's very anti-gun. And I got to say, no matter how you feel on this very polarizing political issue, it's done with such care and humanism and humanity that I don't care where you stand on the issue. This movie's good. I don't know that in today's political climate, I feel like you'd get hit over the head with it in a very like guns are bad, you know, kind of way.
Yes.
And here, boy, they create this wonderful piece of art that's, you know, bred out of a different political era than what we would later go on to experience. So I got to give the writer of the book, the director, enormous credit. They 100% have a very strong agenda, but it is not overt. It is not rammed down your throat. I think Disney's even misstepped and alienated a lot of people sometimes by, it's like, you know, moral message, like, and like shoving it down your throat. Like, it's like, here's a funnel.
Yes.
Now get ready to take some messages. It's like,
Yes.
you know, that's not happening here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, and I may have just misused this word earlier. Actually, didactic, as in like teaching or, you know, directing. Being didactic in storytelling is always potentially fraught because, yes, stories have messages. Messages can be, you know, somewhat moralistic. They can tell you like right from wrong. They can be very Manichaean. But like one of the things for me, personally, especially as a writer, is I want to tell the truth. As I understand it, you know, it's my opinion to some extent, but like I don't want to beat somebody over the head with what I believe or what I think will service an agenda. I want to tell the truth, as I understand it, of a given moment, of a given character, of a given scene. And like the truth of the scene with the deer, right? Hunters shoot animals. We don't see it like they have that when the deer dies, it's sort of a Bambi moment. It is a Bambi moment, basically. But like you said, it's not. They don't really hit you over the head with it. It's these hunters shot the deer. The deer dies. The giant and Hogarth had seen the deer previously when it was alive, and then they see it now dead. And this sort of teachable moment about the nature of life and death, and that guns kill. It's not saying hunting is bad per se. You could take that message from it, but it's not per se saying that. It's not like the hunters themselves. They see the giant, they run away. This is one of the few scenes early, like it's not in the early, but like in the middle point of the movie where people are starting to, throughout the movie, people are seeing the giant. They're having like little moments where they see the giant, but increasingly giant sightings are becoming more common throughout the film, which is relevant. But that scene, the scene where Hogarth is shooting a toy gun leads the giant to instinctively become weaponized himself and shoot laser beams back. All these things are kind of indicating that there's a problem of violence, really, not even just like of weapons, but just of violence. And that as Dean keys into in the third act, the only way to stop violence, to prevent things from escalating, is to de-escalate. If you stop shooting at the giant, then this can be resolved. and he tries to reason with the general and tell the general, like, listen, Hogarth's alive, Mansley lied. He didn't say all this, but he says, like, basically, Hogarth's alive, Mansley lied to you. Stop shooting the giant. We can resolve this. And of course, Mansley does what he does. But yeah, the message is basically violence begets violence. Violence causes death. And if you can avoid violence, you should try to.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I really liked a lot of what you said there. Some other things that I really wanted to point out was there's an enormous attention to detail. I don't have time to go through them all, but like there's moments like where Hogarth gets hit by a limb early in the movie and it hurts him. And Brad Bird said, I put this in there because if you defy gravity later on, you feel danger in the film, but you have a really hard time convincing the audience how to do that if you don't instill that early. So like there's these small little moments. There's a lot of craft and like just small moments that are happening within this that work towards it. One of the things I love when cinematographers do this is they use color a lot, and everything Brad Bird brings up the color scheme in different sections of the Iron Giant, so that up until the third act, everything is brushed with colors of autumn and blue skies, brown leaves. But when the military shows up, everything is tinged with darker and grayer and dark green kind of tones. The colors intentionally pulled out of these moments in the film. It gets colder. This palette gets colder. You feel this happen. Being able to use the emotions of how you're depicting that stuff is just so good. And I think it's really interesting because they did this with a smaller group. They had to do this in less time than in Tarzan did, with fewer people and less money. They were resourceful. They used 3D computer modeling, as you already pointed out, Quinn, and they seamlessly inserted it into 2D hand-drawn environments. I think this is I think people were already fascinated by CGI and Pixar at this point. I think that also hurt this film because people were really excited about new CGI films. This is kind of one of those last great, and I would call this a masterpiece. This is a last great masterpiece from the hand-drawn environment, and I'm really sad that this didn't get more acclaim. I guess it was acclaimed, but more marketability. It's just interesting to him. He's doing something that nobody did at the time, where he brought all of his animators together and he would collaboratively critique them together so that they would be together and know what each other are doing better, and to bring these are skills that he's pioneering techniques that would later go on to change the animation field. He would take transforming rough cut storyboards and insert them just using After Effects and inserting that directly into the animation. Again, you're looking at how this is being made as you dive in, and I'm just gaining so much respect for Brad Bird's attention to detail, but also the logistics of making one of these big productions come together, again, with half the budget. It's really impressive, actually.
I'm struck in particular by... It is very much like a cult film, and it's weird to think back on. It's like a cult animation film. That's what it is. Like it wasn't really appreciated as much as it could have been or should have been in its time. It definitely aged well in terms of like home video and DVD. It wasn't even DVD; it was VHS still back then. But like home physical media. The idea of the character, I think, it didn't have that impact on the popular consciousness that other animated characters did, of the same time, and the ones that succeeded it. But I think in that way, it was like, if you watch this film, you loved it. It's maybe cliche to bring up the Velvet Underground. Like, not everybody bought the album, but everybody that bought the album, I started a band, loved music. That's kind of what this is. It's like, not everybody watched this movie, but everybody that watched this movie loved animation. It seemed. And it is really telling that we're talking about it now, that you can talk about it now, that you can go back to it. And again, it's like watching it today is like watching it 10 years ago. Watching it today will probably be like watching it 10 years from now. It's just an all-timer. And I think because Bird and his team really just wanted to tell the right story the right way, that really just comes through at the end. Like, when you're doing things for the right reasons, I think in the creative process, that tends to, not always, but tends to inform your choices enough that you end up with a quality result. Again, plenty of bad movies and bad art has been made with the best of intentions, but in general, if you are honest and you're trying to tell the story in an honest and compelling way, that will come through.
I agree. I think, sometimes whether it's movie making or really anything else in life, I think sometimes when we get too obsessed over the end result, it ends up backfiring against us. If the purpose of making a movie is to make a lot of money, then this movie may not have ended up being what it was, but instead what the director and the writer really set off to is to tell a really beautiful children's story. And they did that successfully. They focused on wanting to be able to tell a story rather than being able to have a lot of gross earnings in the end. And I just think that they did such a great job. And I completely agree with you, Quinn. I mean, I think this is a movie that, whether we're talking about people watching it in 1999 when it came out, or my son in 2020, or people even after that, my younger kids 5-10 years from now when they're watching it, I really do believe that this is going to be a movie that just stands the test of time.
Absolutely. And Brad Bird, at least, I think he is sad that this movie that he poured his heart and soul into didn't do as well in the box office. He goes on to have a great career. He does The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Mission Impossible, Tomorrowland, and The Incredibles 2. I'll be honest with you, Ratatouille is one of my favorite Pixar movies
Nice.
as well. Definitely really appreciate him. And the more things you read, I just love these little details. Again, like the A13 that's on the license plate is in a painting in the house. It comes up again throughout the movie. It's like this Easter egg that's created by the alumni of California Institute of Arts. There, he's that's the classroom used by the graphic design and animation students that he went into. So
Aw,
there's just
nice.
all these moments of like tipping his hat to the people that have helped him, or the people that he brings in, and the things that
I love
formed
that.
him, and or the tendrils that come out of the Iron Giant. He really loved War of the Worlds from '53. So those three tentacle kind of things coming out, like that's a callback to that, or how it destroys the tank is a love letter to the day the Earth stood still, when they fire on the tanks and stuff there, and they kind of like dissolve. So I really appreciate when you see the level of creativity and all these little details. It's a movie I love, so when I care about these details when they dive in, not every movie puts that much craft and care into every little thing. The animation style, he liked the 101 Dalmatians a lot, and that guided him towards this. I like that animation. I don't think this is quite as funny as that is in terms of its exaggerated nature, but I have to say, again, so many things I like all coming together and channeled so appropriately with so much care and love. I mean, he's all over the place. He's even literally shaking Eli, the boy who's doing Hogarth's voice. He's literally shaking him in order to get his voice to be shaky enough and stuff like that for everything, with his permission.
Yes.
So, I mean, he's all over the place here, and directors often are, but it's cool to see that level of care here on this big animation project. It's a miracle that these things get made when you really sit there and watch it. And watching all the behind the scenes footages of this just made me sit there and go like, wow, the amount of love that he had to carry through this is palpable. So a big part of what we talked about was the time period, but talk about the small town setting here, Quinn. Do you enjoy the Rockwell, Maine, not Roswell, Rockwell, Maine?
Yeah, so the name obviously is a nice little allusion there. Yeah, like it works for me. This small town again feels real. It feels authentic in a way that, again, period pieces don't always come over. It's much more, I would say, like the type of place probably that Brad Bird and his family grew up than it is like, let's say, I Love Lucy or even Happy Days. It feels like a real place. It feels like a place that's not trying to be something. It just is something. It's just real. It's a small town. There's not a ton of exposition as far as like Hogarth and his role in it. Like, we don't know how long they've been there. We don't know if they moved there recently. We don't know if he's been there all his life. We do know that he has moved up a grade, so he's academically a year ahead of his peers. So he's younger and smaller, and he's seen as nerdy. The residents seem to be very kind of folksy, salt of the earth, surprisingly understanding of all the weird things that end up happening over the course of the film. Like the scene where the giant cannonballs into a lake and basically causes a minor flood in the forest, which then pushes everything onto the road, including Dean, who was sitting in a lawn chair. And this guy drives up. Hey, you're out in the middle of the road. Yeah, yeah. Like okay. He just drives off. It's like just that kind of like, yeah, weird stuff happen. Oh, this guy, this mariner. The first scene of the film is Eric something or other. This guy who's out in a fishing boat encountering the giant when he crashes down from the sky, and then he goes in and he tells everybody about it, and they're like, sure, you saw a giant. Was its name Bud Light or something like
Yeah.
this guy telling tall tales. You get the sense like everybody kind of knows each other, and they relate to each other, but not in a way that feels again like cloying or inauthentic. So yeah, very much worked for me.
Yeah. Lizzy, this movie, as I mentioned, was influenced by Edward Hopper, Norman Rockwell, N.C. Wyeth's art. Small Town America. This is right up your alley, is it not?
I love that. And it makes it so much fun to watch as a viewer too, because you can feel that love pour through the story. I mean, I think as an adult, that's why you connect with it so much, is that not only is it a good story, but every single scene has so much love in it and so much passion. Like you can feel that this was absolutely a passion project of the people that made it. And it's just so cool to be able to watch back and see that attention to detail. And not only is it a great movie, but it's a labor of love.
Absolutely. We didn't really talk about the main town. I want to make sure we talk about the small town. I know you like a small town setting.
I love a small town. What's that one movie that we watched?
Inherit the Wind?
Yes, Inherit the Wind. That's what it was. Yes,
you were in love with that little town.
I wasn't like down for like the effigies and like all like the violence and all that. Like I'm not for that, but I just like love this like tiny little town. Like everybody loves each other. I love just this like Mayberry. I'm a huge fan of that. My dad grew up in Harlan, Kentucky, which is like Daniel Boone country in Kentucky, and it's like so small, and that was very much his upbringing, was like this like single mom, very tiny town. Everybody knew him, so maybe that's the soft spot that I have for it, is I'm watching in real time to like stories that my dad may have told me about his own childhood. It really is. This is me. I mean, I love visiting big cities. I love movies where there's a big city. And, we've talked so many times on previous episodes about how sometimes when a movie's taken place in a big city, the city itself almost acts as a tertiary character sometimes. And I think this is to be said absolutely of this town, because this town is what yields the relationship between Hogarth and the giant. If this were to take place in New York City, this would be a completely different movie, right? Like it would be like Iron Giant takes the city. But instead it really yields for this slow pace, just like the town itself, where they're able to get to know each other. After the train incident, he finds a place for him to live with Dean in the junkyard. And I think that the slow pace of this movie, of them being able to play, because of course so much of the meat of the movie takes place while the giant is with Dean. It's really amazing how the slow pace of the town really yields itself to the slow pace of the movie, which I think is where so much of the richness lies. And then personally, I love like a Mayberry town, so it works for me.
They did a great job of creating a number of environments. The woods scenes were fantastic. I liked the barn that he had near his house that he went into. The diner was a little time capsule piece that I really liked. And yeah, you're right, the junkyard was a delight. I loved the Iron Giant could hide there. And we didn't really talk about this, but Dean's character is an outsider. He's a beatnik. He doesn't really mix with like the more rural, more conservative community. He's an artist. He's out there on his own. So he himself is more able to accept the fantastic, to bring this, to be able to bring this foreign creature in. He's not as susceptible to the paranoia necessarily as all that else is going around him. So I think that character construction's really cool and totally consistent, like why he would have a spot in his heart for, like you said, this precocious young kid that comes up and it's like, by the way, I've got this alien thing and we can't tell everybody. And he's like, all right, yeah, I'll help hide you this. So,
Yeah.
I
Gives
mean,
him espresso. I mean, it's like so great.
and that's why you don't give kids espresso. So
That is right. I'm telling you, I'm stimulated.
Yeah, you're stimulated.
Yeah, exactly.
let's talk about the soundtrack here. This isn't like necessarily up in your face, and again, they trashed a Pete Townsend soundtrack. So my question is, does this movie deliver what it needs to in the moment? Again, you're not coming away with toe tapping melody things that you're assuming. Disney's really big on this at the time, and again, Warner Brothers is not playing that game. But is it impactful? Does it work for the movie, and do you like it?
Because they decided ultimately against making it a musical, and I remember reading that as well, that it was a possibility. And it's funny because so many animated films, especially of this era, were musicals that they were kind of bucking a trend. Essentially, you're just going with instrumentals, and you're just going with like very kind of subtle mood music. There's no like really lyrical songs of any note. The diegetic, I don't think it actually is any diegetic music I can think of, really. Like maybe just like some
It
stuff.
does not. It does not go through giant swells in the big moments
No,
necessarily.
yeah,
Like,
no.
you don't have like this big hero like score playing as he's going to intercept the bomb.
Right,
Like I mean, like it's there, but it's not forefront. This is not a John Williams kind of thing where.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yes. It's not John Williams, it's not Hans Zimmer. It's much more just kind of like it sounds like life in a way, like the soundtrack
Mhm.
that we might have in our heads. Like not even that really, because again, it's so subtle. That is one of the ways in the film really is truly subtle. It's like the kind of sounds that you would hear in a small town, just kind of walking through your day. And yeah, it suits the piece because so much of the other stuff that's going on in the film can be at times very fantastical and broad, that probably having a bombastic score would have just undermined that. It would have clashed in a way that just wouldn't have worked for it.
This one's Michael Kamen. It's the only Brad Bird movie not to use Michael Giacchino to do the score for this one. I think some of the interesting things that he mentioned were the tonal shifts that he said to Michael Kamen. He wanted how it goes from somber to bittersweet to almost cheerful in the next scene. Bird would bring up issues that he had with Bambi. He'd say, as a child, it really bothered me that we lost Bambi's mom. And then the next scene was all like flowers and like the music was really happy. And so these create really jarring emotional shifts that happen too quickly. He did not want that Bambi shift. So,
Mhm.
and we do have a dead deer here, by the way. So, I mean, the funeral piece that he has is, there's a little more of an intentional, deliberate to what you're talking about, Quinn. There's a reason we're not being able to say, like, the music really stuck out to me in this moment. That's 100% what Michael Kamen was directed to do. When the giant is knocked out from the electricity, Kamen wrote like an almost funeral, like sad moment, and Brad Bird said, nope, let's make this more like a kid looking for a spaceship in his backyard. It has to, not sad. It needs to be inquisitive with what's going on, like with Hogarth searching him out. Again, he's not trying to hit you over the head with these big swelling moments. I don't know. Lizzy, do you like, I'm not calling it background music, but it is far less, you're not going to come out of this, I don't think, and say like, I listened to the Iron Giant on my iPod this week because I love the score so much.
Right. Yeah. I think at the risk of sounding offensive, I think the music is forgettable in the sense that like I walk out of the movie and I certainly don't mean that in an offensive way, but I think of course if there were no music at all, it's necessary to have the music. It would be very uncomfortable and that silence would be almost deafening if there was no score whatsoever. But it's so subtle that it almost speaks to the overall tone of the entire movie because as we've discussed so many times before, the movie itself is subtle. It is telling a really rich, beautiful story just as it is without trying to put flashing lights and talking animals into the movie. It's just life that with a giant robot.
There is a raccoon swimming in the water. Like
You're right. So
Yes.
yes, but it's so I think the music is just trying to yield itself to that, where it's just trying to take one moment to the another and just kind of carry it on. And I think the subtlety of the music had to have been intentional, especially considering the fact that it's Disney. So there certainly is the power to make it loud and flashy.
Well, this is Warner Brothers, so this isn't Disney.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's counter programming to Disney.
Yes,
Yeah.
excuse me. So it's
Yeah.
but I think that the power was certainly there. And Warner Brothers has made some like really beautiful music, like Anastasia. is like one of my favorite.
They are not rewarded. I think they did the what is it? The Quest
Quest for Camelot,
Quest for Camelot.
Yes,
I mean,
like they had some good musicals there. Like they did some.
which came out and also it also did not perform very well. Like another one that was like, oh no.
they did Space Jam, and that like knocked the socks off of the box
Yes.
office because they had Michael
Yes.
Jordan in it. But all these other ones that we're talking about, I'm really sad that Warner Brothers doesn't get their day. I feel like they're better at it than DreamWorks. Take the Shrek movies out of DreamWorks, and I
Yes.
actually think DreamWorks catalog can get sketchy pretty fast.
Well, without Shrek, they have nothing. I think that's I believe that.
Shots fired.
I really do. I mean, I think Shrek is.
I won't go as far to say it's nothing, but it is greatly inferior to the Disney
Yeah.
catalog once you remove Shrek from it. So I think it's sad that Warner Brothers wasn't able to carve themselves out in this market.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other kettle of fish. Like, if anybody wants to subscribe to me for nothing else, subscribe to me for like my knowledge of this as a long-suffering fan of like Warner Brothers and DC. I've studied this company and their history, and it seems like they luck into things more than anything else a lot of the time. And so, like, having Brad Bird and his team on this was, them lucking into something, even if it didn't pay off at the box office. But a lot of the history of that studio has been just kind of fumbling through and not having like a strong direction or great creative instincts or courage to do the things that need to be done or take big swings. So
Mhm.
it doesn't surprise me that they were struggling in animation because they're kind of a chicken studio. It's a thing I've seen basically throughout my life, unfortunately.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay. I hadn't put all that together. They made Harry Potter. They did '89 Batman. They've really made me happy on some of these things. So I mean, I'm not going to be all hard on them, but they have certainly not played the superhero game as well as Disney has. That is for sure. Do you guys want to hand out some awards?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, Quinn, MVP of Iron Giant.
I mean, I would assume it has to be Hogarth. I mean, it's easy to give it to protagonist. I mean, it's cliche. I would think Hogarth. If not, then definitely Dean, right? It's between Hogarth and Dean, because what Dean brings to this, being, again, an outsider. This film is about outsiders. This film is about people who feel kind of separate, but are still part of the whole. He is able to, again, we don't have a lot of backstory. Like, when I first saw this, I remember, and when I rewatched it, I remember thinking, like, is this guy new in town? Which I think they kind of imply that he is. Certainly, he's just meeting Hogarth and his mom for the first time in the film. He's able to stick up for the underdog, like when the fisherman character who's talking to the giants, like, and I saw it, and Dean's like, and I saw it too, because he's just trying to like stand up for the guy so he doesn't get bullied too much by his friends. He helps Hogarth when Hogarth is trying to convince his mom to let him adopt a squirrel as a pet. Like, all these little things. Yeah, I would say I'm gonna go with Dean as the MVP, just so I don't go with an obvious choice. He really like makes the movie, and without him, it would just be completely different.
Okay, Dean, played by Harry Connick Jr. Then, Lizzy, who is your MVP?
I went with Vin Diesel. I think he did a fantastic job. He does this in the exact same way in Guardians of the Galaxy with Groot. Is I think that he's only has very, very few lines, but I really do think that between the actual animation that's done with him, but then also there's so much personality that has to be put into those little lines, and I just think that he does such a great job with what he has. And I think that there's so much with so little. And I think Vin Diesel was able to put so much heart into it. I'm not sure about this one, but I know he has spoken about how cathartic being Groot was in terms of helping him emotionally heal from losing Paul Walker. And of course, I know that wouldn't be the case in this movie. I would have to imagine that the level of heart that he was able to pour into the Iron Giant was laying down the foundation and the groundwork for what he was going to later bring to Groot years later. And I think he did a great job.
Absolutely.
Great choice there. I'm going to go with Brad Bird as the director here for all the reasons that I've said all night long. I just love everything that in his attention to detail and bringing himself into this one. I will give a shout out to Ted Hughes, the source material for the guy who wrote the Iron Man book. He unfortunately died a year before the film's release. This movie gets a dedication to him in here, but it's a great story, great characters, but I also think that Brad Bird brings it to life and brings it to its highest form. Best Supporting Actor, Quinn.
Oh, okay. So I kind of already.
You went for it with Dean. You promoted him to MVP. You can pick another one, though.
Yeah. I mean, if not Henry Connick Jr., I would probably say. I mean, again, despite the lack of lines, Vin Diesel is absolutely conveying so much with the giant, and also, of course, the animation does a lot. But like, he's conveying so much with the giant that it would between those. It would definitely be between those two for best supporting. I think the villains also are important, but it's definitely between our giant and our human-sized friend as far as supporting. I'll give it to Vin because I already mentioned Dean. So yeah, I'm gonna say best supporting best supporting Vin Diesel.
I've got to go with Christopher McDonald for my best supporting actor. His job as Kent Mansley is so great. Good villain. I just love how colorful it is. I love when he takes the X-Lax. I like when he realizes that he's got to get out of town and like that he's bombed himself and how there's just so much personality in this great bad guy voice here. So he's such a good bad guy. And when you see him interviewed, you forget that he's not a bad guy. Like it's really weird to like see him just be regular. He's so always a bad guy. Hidden gem could be a thing, person, or aspect of this movie that may have gone under the radar here. Quinn.
Emmet Walsh as Earl Stultz. He is the sailor who first sees the giant, and he's probably the most impactful minor character. Again, from there, he's like seeing the giant. He thinks he's seeing a lighthouse, and he sees two lights instead of one, with a pair of eyes. You see his facial reactions for the animation. You hear his voice. The way they animated that character and the way he played it, I'm not going to say it was the greatest, supporting character animation or supporting character role I've ever seen, but it really surprised me how relevant he is. He's the one who calls in the military, essentially. He's the one, like, if he hadn't, and like, you think the way he talks and the way his friends talk to him, like, oh, he's just saying stuff, but no, like, everything he says is true. He says this as a giant metal man than there is. He says he calls the military or called the government, and a guy from the government shows up and investigates. He is very kind of broad and comedic when he needs to be, but also kind of like subtle and like terrified when he needs to be. So yeah, Earl Stultz, the sailor, is probably a hidden gem for the film.
Lizzy, hidden gem.
Russell, you'll appreciate this. I just went with Christopher McDonald. I remember the first time that I watched this movie, again, I'm in my 30s the first time that I watch it, and I hear him talk. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Shooter McGavin. Just like I couldn't stop. And I have not seen him in that much, but his voice is so recognizable. And so it just made my whole day when the first time that I watched it, I could just hear like Shooter McGavin and just all of the amazing quotes that I can't say on this one. I so desperately want to. And oh my gosh, just so good. And he does an absolute job. He's so manic. It's amazing.
You better watch what you say, or I just may go down by the bay, eat some hay. All right. My hidden gem is going to be the poster on Hogarth's wall is a Forbidden Planet poster from 1956. We covered this way back on episode 87. And again, these are just little bits and pieces that Brad Bird sticks in there from the time period. Great time capsule here. Recast. If you had to recast somebody and put somebody else in their place, Quinn, who's it going to be?
No, you can't. No, come on. You can't do this to me. Yes.
It's good. It's a good cast. But
so I love Jennifer Aniston, and I think that she does a great job in the mom role. But the only person I could even think of recasting might be her.
They kicked around some big names for this in consideration, but I'm interested to see what you're going to pick here.
I'm not a huge fan of celebrity actors in animation. Again, that's been more of a modern trend. So if I had my druthers, I'd probably say someone like maybe Gray DeLeslie. I might be mispronouncing that right. She is a great, like, quote unquote, proper voice actress. And I think that she could, do the role justice. Again, Jennifer Aniston is good. She's absolutely good. I'm not saying I want to recast her, but you're making me choose. So
okay, so she's a voice actress. Just trying to see what we would know her from.
Oh, okay. So you would know her from Avatar, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. She actually has done a lot in the realm of Scooby-Doo.
Oh,
She,
nice.
yeah, she typically voices Daphne. Yeah, but she's just a great all-around voice actress.
Okay, great choice there. And I think Disney even did that for a very long time. The celebrity voice acting actually comes a little after this movie, so the fact that it's so heavy is impressive. Lizzy, recast.
So I'm a lot like Quinn, where I love the cast, so I'm only doing this just for the sake of the game. I went with our Hogarth. So it's Eli Marienthal. Is the correct name? So he did a great job. I'm complete props to him. But in terms of everybody else, like we had some really big A-list actors. So I was thinking, who was an A-list kid in 1999? And I went with Jonathan Taylor Thomas, JTT. It was like he'd be able to do such a great job. He
Ah.
conveyed such an amazing
Okay.
I mean, think about like like our Simba. He had to really go there with that horrible. You should have seen Lion King by now, but I still won't spoil it. But if you know that he does a really great job of conveying emotion for a young boy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think he would have done a great job.
I went a little bit deeper. I felt like the General Rogard was
Mhm.
played by John Mahoney. I thought, what if we shot out some more money and got a good grumpy John Goodman to be the general?
Oh gosh, that would have been great.
John
He's
Good.
got a great voice.
Yes, he does.
Love that.
I felt like he would be a good general. Same with you. I'm not really knocking John Mahoney. Not bad at all. Quinn, what is your best shot of the movie?
It's tough. There's so many good ones.
It's a pretty movie.
Yes. I'm just gonna go with the opening. I'm just gonna. I mean, either the opening or the ending, but I'm gonna go with the opening because again, that really just hits you from a screenwriting perspective. Like again, thinking back on how it opens and how it's trying to kind of bring the audience in. We're in space. 1957. We see this thing crashing toward Earth. Then we go down to the ocean and we see the ship, and then we see he's in trouble and all this stuff, the storm, and then the giant. I would say that is probably the most like initially impactful scene, and still resonates with me because I'm mentioning it now. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the opening.
Brad Bird loves your answer because it took him over a year to get that scene done.
Wow.
He said it was very difficult with the amount of money that they had. The studio wanted him to cut that, and he had to fight to keep that in, and really liked that as a point in the movie to do that. So it was hard to conceive with what they were doing logistically at the time. So Brad Bird is somewhere smiling at your answer, Quinn.
Aw.
Lizzy, what's your best shot?
So at this point in the film, Hogarth has been hurt. The Iron Giant sees him and he's so beside himself that he is seeing that Hogarth is laying there in, unconscious. And so pulling in behind them is the general, and they're starting to shoot at him, and he's sitting there holding Hogarth, and he is in just feeling like this overwhelming feeling of grief. And there's this really awesome shot. It's like a blink and you miss it, but where he is shot and there's kind of a blast right behind him. So it almost just completely puts a spotlight back on him. And it's a really cool scene because this idea of these men are giving the best that they have to the giant. And he's not even phased because he's sitting and has just like this unbelievable look of grief on his face. And I just thought it was so cool because in terms of the military, like he's completely untouchable. Like there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to injure this guy at this point, or this giant at this point. And yet he is being shot at, and yet he is sitting there just heartbroken over his friend. And I think that scene itself is pretty, but it's also powerful.
Oh, love the answer. I also, like Quinn, considered the end very heavily. Coming in, I was expecting to put it at the end. But upon this watch, something that I really liked was the moment where Hogarth is down in the woods, tree branches hit him, the giant kneels down, and he's looking at Hogarth in the woods at the sunset, and the way he's kneeling down is very childlike in terms of its curiosity. Instantly, we are endeared to this robot and how this is happening. There's a beautiful sunset in the woods at the background. It is a pretty shot, but like you're saying, Lizzy, it shows instant care
Yes.
in what he's discovering. And so there's discovery, there's curiosity, It's all there. Like if I were to put pictures on the back of a movie, I'd put that in there. So
Love it.
best scene, Quinn.
I would probably say I'm actually going to steal Lizzy's, but I'm going to like adjust it a little bit. The scene where the giant thinks Hogarth is dead is also the first time that he fully gives into his programming. At this point, he kind of understands what's going on. Again, you know, he's had this whole arc and this whole like character development himself, and he understands that there's a part of him that it's almost like a Wolverine moment. Like there's a part of him that just wants to go berserk, and so okay, my friend is dead. You want me to be a gun? I'll be a gun. I'll you know, I'll kill you. You know, I'll attack. So he finally gives in. His eyes turn red, and he goes on the warpath. So I would say that scene, because of all of the layers and the emotions built into it, is definitely right up there.
It's my son's favorite scene too. He's like, look, he's gonna get mad. He's gonna get mad. He really he likes it a lot.
Lizzy, what's your best scene?
My best scene is somewhat after, but it's the whole scene that transpires when the giant, you know, the missile has been launched, and it's just like that whole end sequence where he realizes that he needs to go. He has this realization, and he says, "Hogarth, stay." I go, and he just goes up, and then that, you mentioned this before, but the Superman, you know, he's Superman. It's just, it brings me to tears when I watch it. It's just, it's so innocent and pure, and it's true love, honestly. Like in that moment, like that is the personification of love, is like these two friends and what he's able to do for his town. It really is just in so many ways like the definition of what love is. And I loved that scene. I think it's so powerful, not just for a children's movie, but just a movie. I love it.
My best scene is going to be yours, Lizzy, but just to be different, I'm going to give a shout out to the funny side of things. I loved it when they hid the Iron Giant in the barn, and Dean made it look like it was one of his sculptures, and everybody came in and was convinced that this was Dean's weird art.
Right.
I really liked that one. Best wardrobe and makeup moment, Quinn.
How about Hogarth's bomber jacket and helmet? I think those are particularly impactful. He first puts them on when he's going to go out and investigate, when he realizes there's something out in the forest. That's when he meets the giant and everything. And then later, he puts on the helmet and the goggles when he's doing the stare down with Kent, when they're both, just kind of like watching each other, awaiting, what happens next, and trying to keep each other from doing anything else. So yeah, I would say the jacket and the helmet and the goggles would probably be my key wardrobe for this.
I think that's a great choice. I love that too. That comes to my mind, like when he goes out and grabs his gun and his dad's helmet, presumably because it looks too big for him and stuff like that. And I mean, Lizzy, how about you? Best wardrobe or makeup moment?
I like Dean's hair. I really like his hair. He's got such a neat juxtaposition to him as a character, because he's seemingly like the town black sheep, if there were to be one. Like he's kind of like the weirdo of the town a little bit, and he's lives in a junkyard, and he's this kind of misunderstood artist, but yet he also is really cool. Like he's got this cool guy, smooth, and he's got a swagger to him, and like that's the kind of guy. He's got like this James Dean kind of Danny Zuko vibe going, and it's all in the hair. I really think that his whole persona and attitude and like everything about Dean really worked for me. Like he's just a cool guy.
He's cool unless he has a squirrel up his pants, in which case he has a hard time holding it together then.
Yeah. We'll give it to him. I'm sure anybody.
But I really admire how hard he tried to hold it.
Yes.
The big animated grin that he had on his face. I'm with Dean too. His all black getup is actually really cool.
Yeah.
He does stand out completely from everybody else in the diner. And that whole black thing is not a villain in this case. No.
If anything, it's just to make him seem like almost
different,
like aspirational, kind of like he's just like smooth and cool, and he's a father figure esque. He's like a strong male role model for Hogarth, a good one at that.
And crucially, again, it's subtle in that this is just it's presented as like this is just how he is, right? And you see him at different moments. You see like he's not always as cool as he maybe would try to be, but it doesn't seem like he's a poser either. It doesn't seem like it's like a totally effective persona. It seems like it's naturalistic to him. Whereas can imagine in a more meta movie in a later period, they'd be like a scene where he's gelling his hair and he's like, practicing his lines in a mirror or something, and it would be like deconstructed in a way that would probably undermine, the character.
It's true. I do prefer that mock turtleneck boots, Dean, but you're right. We do get to see him, and he's totally confident in just his robe.
Exactly.
Being Dean too. So
Exactly.
I mean, so yeah, we do see the other end
Love
of the
it.
Dean spectrum there. Change one thing. If you had to change one thing about this movie, Quinn.
All right, I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm going to take Brad's side between the minor conflict between him and his co-writer, Tim Conley's, and say, like, let's just have the giant die. Conley, I just looked it up. He said, famously, like, you can't kill E.T. and then not bring him back, because that was his perspective on it. Again, like, it probably was tested, or gone over with the studio before they finally finished it and sent it out to be exhibited. I'm not saying the happy ending, because it's a happy ending in a way, really, but like, I'm not saying the happy ending completely undermines his sacrifice, but there is something to be said for the idea of the giant literally truly being gone. The finality of that is in some ways more real.
It's the adult talking, Quinn.
Yes.
It's the adult talking.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I'm an adult. That's what it is. 9-year-old Quinn would not agree with me, but if you ask me, I would say, like, just take that out. Just give me like the dark cut. The dark cut.
You want the statue memorial, and that's it.
Yes.
Lizzy, what is your change one thing?
This is, again, just strictly for the sake of the game, because I actually think that there's very, very little about this movie that I would change or that I would want to. But there's a point in the movie where you can tell that there's some kind of potential attraction between Dean and Anne. And then it skips later to them as a couple. Like, once the memorial is made, she's calling him honey, and you can tell that they're together. I just for the sake of the movie, or excuse me, for this game, I think it would have been nice to maybe see a little interaction between the two of them. Just like one small one to show like that it's going to go somewhere and just kind of have that spark, because it's a nice arc for Dean, but it's also a nice arc for Anne too. She's such a great mom, and I like them as a couple. So it'd have been cute to see that for them.
I'm with you. If there had been a little more electricity in the diner, that would have been a nice thing to have added in there.
Yeah.
I'm along those lines. I want a little more of the mom, Jennifer Aniston, knowing that that's a robot with them. I want her to, at the end, I want Dean, the mom, and Hogarth to know exactly what the score is and that the robot's not dangerous. I want a moment of her discovery.
I like that.
Where she gets to see the robot. And to your point, Lizzy, that will rekindle, like, that gives them a shared secret together. And then that would draw them together and 100% make sure that their union at the end is coming from somewhere, that the Iron Giant brought them together as a family too. And so I had considered, you're not going to like this, Quinn, instead of getting a bolt that like can blink and roll around in a box at the end, I kind of wanted Hogarth to get a whole hand, like the hand that like acts like a mischievous dog
like
in the
something.
barn.
Yeah,
I wanted.
That's what it is. The thing.
Yeah, I wanted him to have like a giant dog hand kind of companion there at the house. So you're not gonna like that. Sorry, Quinn.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I went full 7-year-old on that one. Sorry.
I think that the bolt works perfectly because it's a small memento that he holds, and then whatever it is, however much later, I think it's supposed to be a year later or something, it activates. And so essentially the giant, it's implied the giant's been dormant all this time, and suddenly he's coming back to life finally. So I'm fine. I think a hand would just be like a little too, maybe if it was an art piece in Dean's, whatever, that would work.
Okay.
Yes.
Best quote, Quinn.
You are who you choose to be. Absolutely.
Great one. Lizzy, best quote.
Mine's the same. When he says specifically just the lines, "you choose," it's the way that he says it. Hogarth closes his eyes and almost braces for impact when he says it. And there's pain and fear in his voice, but also a confidence in knowing that kind of I've spoken the truth. And I think that the words like "you choose" are such powerful words, but I also think that the way that they were delivered packed such a punch, and I loved it.
Agreed, for sure.
I'm actually going to go with a different one that really touched me. It was after the deer one, where it's the Iron Giant says, "You die?" And he says, "Well, yes, someday." "I die? I don't know. You're made out of metal, but you have feelings. You think about things. That means you have a soul. And souls don't die." And then the Iron Giant says, "A soul?" And he says, "Mom says it's inside of all good things, and that it goes on forever and ever." And the Iron Giant lays back, kind of looks up to the stars, and says, "Souls don't die." I thought that was a beautiful moment as well.
Really
sure.
beautiful.
All right. Quinn, we have come full circle again. Do you want to remind people again where they can follow you and your efforts?
Absolutely. So again, I am Quinn Que, also known as Edo Quinn on the internet, EDOKWIN. You can just search me up in your preferred search engine or social media platform. I have a patreon.com/Edo Quinn, and I have a Substack, the Edo Quinn editorial. So it's edoquinn.substack.com. I talk about film, television, popular culture. I've been doing that thing that everybody does, unfortunately, on Twitter, where I just sort of backslide into politics, but I've been trying to pull back on that per advice from friends and just talk more about the arts and things that I like rather than things that I hate. So you can follow me there and engage with me.
Yay, movies. Boo, politics. All right. Quinn, on a 5-star scale with half-star intervals, what would you give the Iron Giant from 1999?
So what's funny is I have a Letterboxd too, and so I already have scored it. I think I scored it like a 4.5. But yeah, it is absolutely like an all-time right. That for me, like I'm a hard grader. I don't generally give things more than like a 3 or 3.5. So yeah, easily I would say a 4.5.
Wow, what does it take to get a 5 out of you, man?
I don't think I've given anything a 5. And I just double check. I gave it a 4.5 on Letterboxd. I'm gonna stick with a 4.5. So lock it in, 4.5. I don't think I've given maybe The Godfather, but like I no, actually I gave Pulp Fiction a 5. But like it's hard.
Nice.
I'm a hard grader, man. You know, I do this
You
for a
are.
living.
You're
But not review movies, but like make things.
Sure.
This is very fair.
Lizzy, how about you? 5-star scale, half-star interval.
So for me, this movie is, for what it is, it's a children's movie. It's perfect. So for me, this is a 5-star movie. I think it is just spectacular. It's entertaining, it's endearing, it's sweet. There's great moral lessons to be found, and it is like a really lovely children's movie. And it's a movie that I have enjoyed so much watching as an adult that I deeply wish I had been able to find as a child. But this is one of those movies where we have the movies that our kids want to watch all the time, and eventually you just get very fatigued. I don't with this movie just because it's perfection. I love it. I don't think I'll ever get sick of it. And I really look forward to when my middle child and my daughter are ready to watch it. I think it's perfect.
And I'm the opposite of you, Quinn. My co-host Chad sometimes says, "Stop giving so many 5 stars to things because you're too easy. Everything gets 5 stars from you." I'm like, I like things a lot. I love Chad.
Yes.
I love easy. I don't know what to tell you. I fall in love with these movies, and I came in thinking 4.5, but then I watched it with my son, seeing him connect with it in that way, studying it. And when a movie, sometimes you study it, there's a level of craft that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I appreciate this movie to the 5-star level now. So I was already at the 4.5 before we ventured into this effort. I'm full 5 now. So.
Love it.
Hey, fair.
I pass out 5 stars. like Reese's Cups
I
at
do too as
Halloween,
well,
man.
yes.
Sure, we're gonna put your name in the poster.
That's right.
I just like things a lot. I don't know what to say. So, Lizzy, do you want to help us pick a movie for next week?
Yes, I am ready. Okay, so this week we were talking about a boy and his coming of age tale. We're going to switch it over to the girls. So next week's going to be for the girls. We have got 3 90s movies featuring a tough female lead. Option 1, La Femme Nikita from 1990. Convicted felon Nikita isn't going to jail. She's given a new identity and trained stylishly as a top secret spy assassin. Option number 2, Tank Girl from 1995. A girl is among the few survivors of a dystopian Earth. Riding a war tank, she fights against the tyranny of a megacorporation that dominates the remaining water supply of the planet. Option number 3, G.I. Jane from 1997. Lieutenant Jordan, a U.S. Navy analyst, joins the U.S. Navy Special Warfare Group and struggles to prove her worth in a unit dominated by men. But a cynical Texas senator has sold her out.
Brian Fry would not let me go on if I didn't pick Tank Girl. Here.
Right.
So I mean, we've got to pick Lori Petty. She's tough. Tank Girl. This is a lot of fun. Fantastic soundtrack too, by the way. So I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. And you know what else was fun? Having you on the show, Quinn. Thanks so much, man.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me, and you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable as well. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. So subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at @movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. And producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. So we invite you to support our show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. All contributions are much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Lizzy?
Happy as a hippo.